Well, it was when I fell off the chair, when I talked about how I was 3 weeks into detox, and I was planning my son's birthday party, and I had this stress, and I thought I needed to take something for this stress, and I realized I would never have anything outside myself again to deal with the stress if I was going to really get better. And I fell off my chair, and I realized I had to reach out to somebody who was in recovery, and that's when I called my friend's husband. But yeah, that was pretty. I felt after that when those people called back, and I started going to meetings and meeting people, I felt caught in a golden net. That's the way it felt to me, and it sometimes still feels like I had jumped off, like I was at the jumping off point, like it says in one of the books, and I jumped off, and I was caught by this golden net of people who called me back for free.
That was Jennifer Matesa, and this is the SHAIR Podcast.
It's time for the SHAIR Recovery Podcast, where we bring you amazing life-changing success stories from addicts and alcoholics all over the world who share their inspiring journey in recovery. And now, here's your host, O.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the SHAIR Podcast. And today we have Jennifer Matesa joining us on the show. Jennifer is the author of Sex in Recovery, A Meeting Between the Covers. Sexuality in the context of recovery is rarely talked about openly, in part because our broader culture may inhibit us from sharing our true experiences. What does it mean to have an intimate relationship in sobriety? Exploring that question deepens our recovery journey. We're going to delve into the book, and Jennifer's also going to share with us her battle with alcohol and prescription drugs, the wreckage it caused in her life, and her journey into recovery up until today. She's got an amazing story. We covered a lot of information on this interview. But before we dive into Jennifer's story, I just wanted to read another one of the iTunes reviews that caught my attention. Last week, I read an iTunes review from one of the Dopey Podcast listeners and realized I've stopped reading these reviews before the podcasts, so I'm going to try and pick up that habit again. So this review is the one that really caught my attention, and this is from T. Swan, sending my thanks to O. Omar, thank you so much for this podcast. I found it about 6 months ago or so. I've been struggling with sobriety for years now, trying all of the different ways to moderate. I've started again in the new year, January 2nd, 2016. I'm on day 2 again. As someone who doesn't resonate with the 12-step program and going to AA, this is a priceless resource. 2 of my favorites were Cole Chance. I now do yoga with her on Yoga TX. And I just listened to Carly Benson. Her story spoke to me so much. Such wisdom and quotable sentences. Another great aspect of this podcast is that through the seriousness of the stories, there's laughter and jokes. Addiction is serious, but being able to joke about the things we all go through helps strengthen the sense of community. Keep it up. Thanks so much for the review, T. Swan. And it's so true. This is such a serious topic. But one of the things my sponsor taught me very early on in recovery is you have to be able to laugh at yourself. It's imperative to your recovery. It's imperative to your happiness. Rule 62, don't take yourself so damn seriously. And that rule and that mindset has helped me over the years tremendously. It's helped me in my marriage. It's helped me with my relationships with my friends. It's helped me with my own daughter and my mother, and the list goes on and on. It's the ability to not take yourself so seriously that allows you to reflect instead of react. We're super sensitive people, and in many cases, if something doesn't resonate with us right away, we tend to react. We tend to get defensive. What the fuck did you mean by that? Instead of taking a moment to pause and reflect. And if it's bothering you enough, then the ability to say, so what did you mean by that? And most of the times what you'll come to find out is that it's not what you thought it was or as bad as it was. Or if they were trying to be a dick, they'll backpedal, they'll feel a little embarrassed, and it'll diffuse the whole situation. If you can wear recovery like a loose garment, then soon you'll be able to wear life like a loose garment. Go with the flow and don't take yourself so seriously. So now it's time to dive into Jennifer's story. But first, if you have not yet rated and reviewed the SHAIR Podcast, please, one of the best ways to help support the show is to go to iTunes, leave us a 5-star rating and a review, and that helps catapult us up the ratings on iTunes, which will make it easier for more and more people to find the SHAIR Podcast. Now, in the past, many of you have asked, how can I help support the show? Well, I'm going to keep it simple for you. The first way is by donating via PayPal or Bitcoin. And of course, I want to thank all of our listeners who have been generously donating every month to the SHAIR Podcast. Make no mistake about it, you guys are making a huge difference. But again, we can always use more. And now you can even send us donations using Bitcoin. So if you go to the website, www.theshairpodcast.com, on the top right corner, there's a donate button. Click on that button and it'll take you to the page where you can donate either by PayPal or by Bitcoin. On a weekly basis, I have over 5,000 listeners every week who listen to the SHAIR Podcast. So if 100 of you guys would send me $5 a month or more, there are a few listeners that are sending $10, $20, and even $50 every month. That would completely support the show from beginning to end. So for those of you who have the wherewithal to send me $5, either by PayPal or by Bitcoin, then by all means, please feel free to donate now. We could really use the support. Also, when you're purchasing stuff on Amazon, there are those of you that are still clicking on the Amazon link on the SHAIR Podcast website before doing their purchases on Amazon. But again, there are thousands of you listening. If each and every one of you could just remember to go to the SHAIR website, click on the Amazon button before you do your shopping, that is also going to make a tremendous difference for us financially. So I haven't been one to emphasize it in the past, right? But now we've got a solid listener base. I know you guys love the show. I know you guys get a lot out of it. There are those of you, just like in the meetings, that are newcomers. The money's tight. Keep listening. The show will always be for free. The SHAIR Podcast private accountability group will always be for free. But for those of you who can, kick in a couple of bucks. Help us out here. And not to forget the SHAIR Podcast private accountability group. Again, it's growing like crazy. Guys, go to the SHAIR Podcast, www.theshairpodcast. Click on the button that says join the Facebook private group. For those of you that are in the private accountability group, you know how vital and important that has become. There's over 1,500 members in there. If you don't want to go to meetings, if you have problems connecting with people, if you need something more than just the podcasts and are not ready to cross over into meetings or some other structured program, then the private accountability group is perfect for you. Jump in there, make comments, ask questions, or just read the posts. There are so many people out there that have the same questions that you have. All you have to do is just read those and then read all the follow-up answers and responses that come. And make sure to subscribe to my weekly newsletter so you know every single time a brand new episode is launched. And of course, if you have any questions, just email me, o@theshairpodcast.com, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. So now a quick message from our sponsors, and then on to the show. Would you like to join a free, anonymous online group that offers a daily topic email with popular recovery resources, accompanied by a secret Facebook group for discussion? Then go to dailyaaemails.com for more information about Transitions Daily. And don't forget to share dailyaaemails.com with friends, in meetings, and with sponsees in recovery. Sober Nation is the largest online recovery community and treatment resource center. They provide treatment resources to those struggling with addiction, as well as to the family members who are caught in the crossfire. On top of that, Sober Nation is a huge community of good people who share their experience with each other. They have informative content, recovery and addiction news, as well as an entire clothing line which helps expand the culture of recovery. They can easily be found at www.sobernation.com. Sober Nation is putting recovery on the map. Hey, Jennifer, thanks for joining us.
Omar, it's awesome to be with you. Thank you so much.
Oh, this is great. I'm excited. How you feeling today?
Yeah, I'm doing great today. How about you?
I'm feeling fantastic. I'm ready to jam on this.
Excellent. Let's do it.
All right, let's do this.
Let's get it done.
Yeah, let's do this. Okay, folks, today we have Jennifer Matesa joining us on the SHAIR Podcast. And Jennifer is the author of Sex in Recovery, A Meeting Between the Covers. Healthy sexuality within the context of recovery is rarely talked about openly, in part because the larger culture restricts the space required to name our experiences in open, honest ways. Jennifer gives us that space by bringing the language of recovery to this more hidden part of our healing, allowing us to truly practice these principles in all our affairs. Did I get that about right?
Yeah, that's awesome.
All right, excellent. So first of all, Jennifer, just give us a brief overview of what your daily routine looks like, including recovery.
Well, in the morning, before I get out of bed, I say a prayer to be guided in the day. That's my recovery. That's the way I start out my day, by orienting myself. I was taught early in recovery not to pray, not to drink or use, but to pray to be guided, pray to have my thoughts and actions guided, and speech guided by whatever force I align myself with. And those forces have changed throughout my recovery. So I do that, and I have a cup of tea and toast, and I try to eat healthfully during the day. I work from home, so I spend a lot of time in my living room and in my upstairs study. And I walk every day with my dog. That's also a big part of my recovery, just getting moving and getting out and enjoying the world. Sometimes I can get super wrapped up in whatever work I'm trying to accomplish, and I have to remember that there are other parts of life. And so I cook myself good food. I move my body. I get good sleep. I meditate and pray, and then I have pleasure. And those are 5 things that I outline in my book, The Recovering Body. That was the book that I wrote before Sex and Recovery. I've learned that it's really important not just to take care of my spirit, but also to take care of my body in recovery, because drugs and alcohol really did a number on my physical being. So I really try to honor my body today.
Now, the topic of your book is sex and recovery. I'm assuming that probably, you just mentioned drugs and alcohol were a big part of your journey as well. So when you got clean and sober, was your journey initially in either AA or NA or some sort of recovery-based or 12-step-based program? And then did you segue into, say, for example, SLAA, or is that not part of your journey?
Well, sex and recovery, I make clear in the introduction, it's not at all about sex addiction, okay? It's about bringing sexuality into the normal conversation of recovery. And what happens a lot of times when we drink and use, our sexuality gets hidden, it gets covered up, or it gets manipulated. We manipulate it with substances, or we numb it out. And when we get sober and clean, our sexuality reawakens. Sexuality is really a primal, basic life force that keeps us alive, Right. But we live in a culture that does not talk about sexuality. So no, I didn't do SLAA at all. I did Al-Anon for 10 years before I joined the 12-step recovery fellowship that I belonged to for my addiction. And I don't speak about that in the media. I don't say what it is because I abide by the 12th tradition about anonymity. But I do allow myself to talk about the 12 steps because I've done the 12 steps for almost 20 years, if you count Al-Anon too, which is a serious program. So that's what I do. I do a 12-step program for my addiction.
Beautiful. I love it. And so how much clean time do you have, and when is your anniversary date?
My anniversary is the 3rd of January, 2010. And I detoxed in September, October, November of 2008. So and that's part of my story that I'll tell you later, but I had about 14 months in there where I was really suffering, and I couldn't get relief physically or spiritually, but it was a great deal of it was physical. And so I learned, when I got sober, I learned how to take care of my body. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later.
Beautiful. I love it. So how old were you the first time you drank or used drugs? And more importantly, how did they make you feel?
Well, I was 17 and when I first had my first drink. And it's crazy. I thought about this when I was speaking at a meeting a week ago or so. I realized recently, because my son is 20, almost 20, and I've never seen him. He's never brought alcohol or drugs into the house. I've never seen him high or drunk or whatever. That's amazing. I feel good about that. But I grew up with alcoholism in the family. My dad drank at least a 6-pack every night after dinner or after he got home from work. And I could have stolen alcohol really easily, but I had my first drink at 17. The very first day I went to college, I moved away from home, 2 hours from home. And I was so nervous that I didn't know what to do. And when someone gave me a drink, I thought, okay, well, this is what people do. They drink. And what it did was it allowed me to let a guy grope me and, shove his tongue into my mouth, which is not something that I'd ever done before. I mean, I'd never made out with a guy. And here I was, like, doing shit that I'd never done before. And I needed a substance, like I needed an outside solution to solve the problem of my sheer nervousness and my feeling that I did not fit in with other people.
Wow. Man, what a great start.
It was all tied up with sex too, which is like why I loved writing this book, because I interviewed 36 people for Sex and Recovery, 36 ordinary recovering people, and story after story after story, it was people telling me, yeah, I started drinking, and either they were abused in childhood and they started drinking and using at like age 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, or they didn't have any sexual trauma in their childhood. They just had like the normal sexual problems that Americans have because we don't talk about sexuality, like the sheer nervousness and oversensitivity around sex and sexuality, and they started drinking when they went to their first school dance or when they had their first date or whatever. So time after time, it was like, yeah, people were like, I could not deal with sex, and I started drinking and using around sexuality.
Beautiful, beautiful. All right, well, Jennifer, you're all warmed up, so it's time.
I'm lubricated.
I love it.
Okay.
All right. Feel free to use as many puns as you would like throughout the interview. I'm all good. All right.
Okay, good.
We're open on this show.
Yeah.
Good. So it's time for you to share your story, the battle against drugs and alcohol, the wreckage it caused in your life, when you hit rock bottom, and finally your journey into recovery up until today. So Jennifer, take it away.
Right. So thank you. So the battle against drugs and alcohol, when I started drinking, as I said, at age 17, I just had no idea when to stop, how to stop, from the very first time I drank, I just had no conception of how anybody, like any normal person, would know when to stop. And I got really drunk. I didn't get drunk, day after day. I didn't keep alcohol in my room. You weren't allowed to. I never bought alcohol. I always went to parties where they were serving it. And of course, when you're a young woman in college in America, there are many men who just want to get you drunk. Mm-hmm. So I just drank, and I had several. I never blacked out at that point, but I had several. I remember, having bed spins and just horrible, horrible nausea and all of that. And I would go back to it, after surviving the hangover. The next weekend, I would go back and drink again, So, the wreckage it caused, I think the wreckage that alcoholism and drug addiction caused in my life started before I even started using substances, because I grew up around alcoholism. And I just think that's really, my codependency and my difficulty, understanding the truth about relationships, which is the result of alcoholism in the family system, that's intertwined with my compulsion to use drugs and alcohol. Because when you can't be honest in a relationship and you can't talk about your feelings and express them while you're having them, it leads you to have just enormous stress in relationships. And what do people in this country do? What do people everywhere do that when they have enormous stress, they quite often just have a drink or take some kind of drug,
right?
And so I think that I was primed, by my childhood. I saw people handling stress with drugs and alcohol. My mother died at age 58 of lung cancer because she smoked 3 packs a day for 40 years.
Oh,
so that's a serious, serious addiction. Nicotine, I've interviewed scientists about this. Nicotine is, without a doubt, the most addictive drug. And so I saw her. Yeah, she was a chain smoker. I saw her. She would get stressed out and she'd start, smoking. And then I saw my dad, of course, use alcohol. And I saw a lot of other relatives as well, use alcohol, to deal with everyday life. Not even just enormous stress, but just everyday life stress. I just love the idea of, I went to a meeting today where they were talking about triggers, and I just feel like triggers, the whole idea of triggers is pretty ridiculous because, people like us, anything is a trigger. Life is a trigger. Getting up is a trigger and going to sleep is a trigger, for Christ's sake. So yeah, I drank through college and then I graduated, and one of the biggest pieces of wreckage that the drinking caused in my life was that I crashed my car when I was 23. And the guy that I was dating at the time was in the car. He was also a really pretty heavy drinker. I tended to hang out with people who drank. And it's unclear from the police report. I think that's really the only time I blacked out when I was drinking. I had a really difficult night that night. I mean, I'm not going to tell that whole story, but I got into the car. I remember the person who I was at a wedding reception. I remember the person bringing the car to me, the valet, asking me if I was okay to drive and saying, yes, I was okay to drive. And the police report says that my car was on the right side of the road and the other car crossed the line, but I blacked out. So it was horrible. I mean, waking up in the emergency room and having my head sewn up by, doctors, seeing the guy that I was dating, neither of us had worn seatbelts. So we both went into the windshield, and his face was all scratched up by the glass. I mean, I was picking glass out of my skin for days. I had to go back to work with my head shaved. I mean, it was just not knowing what the truth was, whether I had caused this or not. And of course I was sued by everyone, including the guy I was dating. I was sued by everyone. And so I came to fear the male. I came to fear, I like an enormous fear was implanted in me. And no one ever said to me in the hospital, they didn't say, you know what, your blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal limit and you really have a problem. And I wasn't arrested. I wasn't punished. No real consequences except for the fact that I lost my insurance. I could not drive after that. So, I mean, that was a significant consequence, but nobody said, look, you have a problem. And I just think that's so important. I mean, I think physicians ought to be able to recognize the signs of addiction since, 10% or more of the population could have some kind of substance addiction.
Of course.
Yeah. So anyway, I mean, I quit drinking for a while after that. And I remember having a fight with that guy that I dated because he came to visit me when I left the job that I was doing, and I went to graduate school where I didn't need to drive. I could just take the bus. So I went to graduate school, and he used to come to visit me, and he came to visit me, and he had been smoking weed in his car. And I remember this was like the end of the relationship. I mean, I remember saying, he was a lawyer. I remember saying that's a felony, and he said, well, it's really, is it as bad as crashing your car when you're blacked out? So, ooh. I mean, it's just, just the horrible, I think that's like classic, like the horrible communication patterns of addictive families, and addictive relationships. Like you cannot tell the truth. You can't be vulnerable in a relationship. You always have to attack or defend yourself. So this is awesome. I haven't talked about this part of it before.
Bring it.
Yeah. So I quit drinking, but then I was at graduate school at a major research university, and I'd had headaches for 10 years, like serious migraines, which is a neurological disability. And part of the alcoholism, like the results of alcoholism in my family, is that my mother didn't like to take us to the doctor. So I'd never had these headaches treated. I'd never had them I'd never been looked at by a neurologist. I just knew that 2 or 3 times a month I would be like in my bedroom with the blinds pulled. And, I used to tie ties or scarves around my head to it just felt like my head was going to explode. And so I went to the doctor, and of course at this research university, research physicians, and they gave me painkillers. Like the first opioid I ever tried was Stadol. It was a wonderful, delicious nasal spray. He told me to take 2 hits of this and then do it near a place where I could lie down because I would probably feel tired. I mean, I took one hit and I was in bed for the entire day. Oof. And it was great. It was great because one roll, headaches and all the headache treatments played in my life was I tend to overwork myself. I tend to push myself through. I'm an achiever, and I tend to not listen to what my body and my mind is telling me about relaxing and balancing my life. And so I would get these headaches, and then I would get the drugs. I would take the drugs, and the drugs would knock me out. And people would call, and I'd say, I can't really talk to you because I have a headache and I'm all drugged out. I would actually say that, and it would be my way of like escaping the horrible, like the really onerous demands I put on myself. It was just ridiculous. Like you could not. I mean, one thing I've tried to teach my son is, when you're stressed out, when you feel like you're working too hard, you have to take a break and exercise or talk to somebody you care about or something. So, yeah, anyway, I started getting drugs. I had Stadol for a while. I abused the Stadol, and my neurologist cut me off. She never said, yeah, you're abusing this drug. I see the signs of drug abuse in you, and this can lead to addiction, and I think you need to get some treatment, and here's where you should go to get treatment. It was always really punitive, like I was a bad person somehow. So I learned really early in my headache treatment to hide the way I really use drugs from my doctor.
Right.
Like I could not actually say, yeah, you know what, I want to take this. I want to take this when it's not appropriate. And I remember telling my therapist at the time, like, I'm starting to get worried because I wish a headache would come on so I could take my medicine. And I said, I think I might be an addict. And she went, oh, you are not an addict. Addicts take drugs to escape from life. And you're doing this so that you can function better. So that like became my benchmark. And it gave me license to, like, when I was given codeine, Tylenol 3 or whatever, I like took one more. I thought, well, no, I'm not an addict, so I can take one more. You know what I mean? Like, what's the problem here?
Right.
And I would chew my drugs. Like the doctor doesn't say, take 2 tablets and chew them. That's against prescription rules. It's a prescribing information. That's using a drug against prescribers' instructions, and that is a sign of addiction. And if I had been asked, like I've blogged about this, I've talked to physicians about this because I've lectured to medical students and physicians. I've said, if you see a patient come back asking for an early refill, ask them, how are you using this medication? Are you chewing it? Confront them. Because if I had been confronted at that time by somebody who knew how drugs were abused, and a physician and had asked me, are you chewing your drugs? Are you chewing your medication? I probably would have said yes, or I would have lied really badly, and she would have been able to say, what, I think you're really having a problem. So in other words, I began my opioid addiction. I had a serious opioid addiction, and I began it with treatment for legitimate pain. I love when people say legitimate pain, as though there's illegitimate pain. Like bastard pain, like pain that doesn't really exist. I mean, I suppose there are people who fake pain and go to the ER, but like my pain the pain that I've had, that I've sought pain treatment for, has been really serious, and it actually exists. So yeah, anyway, those doctors, if they prescribe those drugs, they need to know how they're abused, and they need to know, they need to be able to ask their patients how they're using them. And then they need to, if they see signs of abuse, they need to respond with compassion and treatment, and not punishment and censure. So I continued to abuse the medications. I was given Fiorinol. I was given other medications for about 6 or 7 years in my 20s. And then I got pregnant. I got married and I got pregnant. And at that time I was taking a couple Fiorinol, maybe two to 4 Fiorinol a day, every day. And I was also taking migraine, like a board of drugs that would squeeze the blood vessels. And when I got pregnant, I stopped taking everything, and I actually felt better. And I think it was, during the first trimester, I felt horrible because of the hormones. But during my second trimester was one of the best times of my life. I was given codeine during my pregnancy because it's the safest drug for babies. And during my second trimester, I hardly took any. I just felt so well. And I said this in a meeting the other day. I said, I think during my pregnancy, I was able to turn my life over to a power greater than myself, and that was the pregnancy.
Wow.
Like I could not control what cells went where. Like I could not make sure the brain got developed. I couldn't direct every last little thing. It had to be up to something else. It had to be up to the pregnancy, whatever had created, and I got pregnant by accident. So it was like, it was really not of my planning. I did not plan this. And so I turned my will and my life and my pregnancy over to the care of this force. And I felt really, really well. And then the hormones they changed again in the third trimester. And toward the end, I started feeling, I had a lot more headaches, and I was super afraid to take any medicine. And then I had the baby. And I think that started a period, like I had a 31-hour labor. And my mother had been diagnosed with cancer. Her cancer returned when we took the baby to London when he was 3 months old. So we moved house when he was just 3 months old after my 31-hour labor. And then while we were in London, my mother's cancer came back, and she had brain surgery while I was out of the country. And then we came back, and her cancer came back again, and she died. And then we moved house again for a year. And after all those stresses, I just could not, like, my body, I think because I've read about this, like people who grow up with extreme stress in childhood just are so sensitive, some of us, and add like the addictive, like the predisposition for addiction. I mean, I think many of us with addiction are super sensitive beings anyway.
Yes.
So I just broke down. Like we were in Buffalo, New York for a year, and I became, like, my body became so full of pain. I couldn't sleep without like stabbing pain in my back and my legs. I was given, like, I was seeing a temporary doctor up in Buffalo, and he was giving me Vicodin, and I started taking it every day in Buffalo. And then I was researching, actually. I was part of the whole PR mechanism behind the pain is the fifth vital sign movement. I was researching policy briefs for a major foundation that funded that work and actually promoted OxyContin as a solution to chronic non-malignant pain as well as chronic cancer pain.
Yes.
And I was talking to these bigwig doctors in LA and in New York and telling them, look, I just have all this pain. And they were, and also the policy people up in Wisconsin. And they were saying, you need to go to a pain clinic. I mean, you need to get this pain treated, and nobody should be in pain. Nobody should have pain. So they set the expectation for me that I should not have this pain. And I became very resentful that I had this pain. And I after we came back from Buffalo, I went to the pain clinic at the university, and they started giving me really good drugs. Like, they started me off on hydrocodone with no Tylenol, which I sort of call Vicodin Zero. It's like no Tylenol, just hydrocodone. And then they added morphine to that. So within a very short period of time, I had gone from taking about 10 milligrams of Vicodin per day to taking 150 milligrams of pure hydrocodone plus 120 milligrams of morphine.
Oh, man.
That's my pain was being treated. Okay. And, it came with all kinds of side effects. I mean, the GI side effects of that much opioid medication in my system. I mean, it was just really, really hard to go to the bathroom, let's say. And, it completely numbed me out. I mean, it didn't really take care of all the pain. It took care of a fraction of the pain, and the rest of it made me not care about. And it also made me not care about a lot of other things in my life. I cared about my son, and I cared about my marriage. I cared about my job. But as my addiction progressed, I became less and less able to really be myself. I mean, and it happens gradually. It's not like one day you're yourself and then the next day you're entirely changed. So it's over a period of months or even years that things change, and you don't recognize the incremental changes in one's personality in addiction. But and I would have fights with my husband. He would say, I think you seem like a different person. And I'd say, I need to take these medicines because I'm in pain and I need this medication. My doctor told me I'd be on it for the rest of my life. She didn't give me any real hope that, I could do anything else besides take medication. She did prescribe like PT and massage and stuff like that. But But it wasn't like the real investment was in the drugs, So after about 2 years or 2.5 years, I got put on, my period quit. That's one serious side effect of morphine for me, is it shuts down all my hormones, which is really serious side effect for women in their 30s because it puts you at risk of osteoporosis.
Oh,
not
wow.
to mention it kills your sex drive, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
of
it puts you
course,
into instant menopause. I had hot flashes and the whole bit. And she never asked me. She never said, is your period okay? This is a really, really common side effect of chronic opioid use for anyone, not just people with addiction, but anyone who's out there using pain treatment, opioid pain treatment on a daily basis can. And this goes for men too. I mean, I've talked to men who've had terrible testosterone problems, lack of libido, inability to orgasm, inability to have erections and all of that. And when they get, and they can't even build muscle mass because they were prescribed so much opioid. And when they finally get testosterone shots, they can begin to rebuild the muscle mass, and they begin to build their bodies, and then they're able to decrease the drugs because they start to feel better. So, physicians just they don't take care of the patients when they're on chronic opioid therapy.
It's not in their interest to do that.
Well, exactly, right? I mean, exactly. And I could go on and on about this all day, but where OxyContin has now moved out of the market, we now have Suboxone. Okay, so these companies saw an enormous market in this country for their drugs, and they still see it. And we have to be really, as consumers of healthcare, we have to be really aware of that and make our decisions accordingly. And I never, ever, ever take a drug anymore without knowing all of its potential side effects, including ones that aren't written about, right? I mean, 25 years ago, they said Prozac had no sexual side effects whatsoever, especially for women. And now we know that a majority of people who take those drugs have sexual side effects. So, it is not in their interests, to be honest, about these medications. Anyway, I was put on fentanyl, which is a drug.
Oh, my God.
For headaches, for migraine headaches and fibromyalgia. I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia at the pain clinic. And I do have fibromyalgia. I mean, when I have a fibromyalgia flare, it's really horrible. I mean, I have pain all over my body, but I have learned in recovery how to take care of myself on a daily basis to minimize the possibility of going into a flare of fibromyalgia. And those were skills that nobody at that clinic taught me. I had to teach them to myself. Anyway, I got put on fentanyl, which is the drug that is spiking heroin across the country, especially in the Appalachians where I live. I live in Pittsburgh. And, in 2014, I think it was, 22 people within a space of 2 weeks died of fentanyl-laced heroin. And it's becoming more and more common. And I managed, after 3.5 years on fentanyl, my period did come back on fentanyl. It was really weird, but it came back. So my hormones were functioning marginally. But I thought, I can't do this. My father died. My mother had died in 1999, and my father died in 2007, really quickly, of his alcoholism. Like it was a cancer in his GI tract. They couldn't even find the primary. He had so much cancer in his body. He had a tumor in his upper arm bone, his left arm, and it ate through the bone. And when it ate through the bone, his arm fractured. And he was in the hospital at this point, but they splinted his arm and they gave him fentanyl. And this man who was 225 pounds, 6'2" guy, was getting a quarter of the dose of fentanyl that I was getting. And I'm thinking, there is something really wrong in this picture. Like by this time, I realized, I had really, this drug thing had really gotten out of control. And I was really tired of like running out of fentanyl and going into withdrawal. I went into withdrawal a couple of times. It was really, really awful and serious. I could not take care of my duties. I couldn't take care of my child. I took care of him, but I wasn't really, I couldn't be an optimal mother, like I wanted to do that for him. And so I promised myself when I ran out of fentanyl once in 2005 that I would, if it ever got that bad again, I would go into rehab or do something. And of course it got that bad again. So I called a rehab, like the best and most reputable rehab that I knew of in my area, and basically asked them to like detox me over the phone. I was like, can you do outpatient detox? They were like, honey, no. No.
I love it.
Yeah. So I called my primary care physician, who knew that I was on these drugs. I don't know how she didn't get that I was having trouble, but she didn't see me as often as my pain physician. My pain physician saw me every 3 months, and I would go in active withdrawal. I mean, my heart rate would be like, I would be in tachycardia, and they never said a word about this. Like, they never said, yeah, I think you're really having, they would give me clonidine, but they would never say, I think you're really having, you're in addiction. So I called my primary care physician, and she referred me to the same doctor that the rehab referred me to, because I decided I had enough Al-Anon. Like, all this time I was going to Al-Anon, which Al-Anon saved my life. I mean, it's such a wonderful program. I had a wonderful sponsor. And
it's amazing that you were going through all this and in the middle of a 12-step program.
Yeah, well, yeah, I didn't realize, like, my idea was, I knew way back in 1999, which is when I started Al-Anon, I knew way back then that I needed a spiritual program like the 12 steps. And I talked to an alcoholic friend of mine who was a member of AA, and I said, look, I don't drink anymore. Like, I'd quit drinking. So I'd gone to AA meetings, and I just thought, I don't feel like an alcoholic. Like, how can I say I'm an alcoholic? Well, I know now that I can say I'm an alcoholic because I drank alcoholically. Also, I can belong to AA if I want to, because I don't want to drink anymore, and that's the only qualification for membership. But she said, okay, so, and I said, and I take 1 tablet or 2 tablets of codeine a day. Like, how can that? I would go to NA meetings, and these people had sold their bodies. They'd sold all of their possessions for drugs. They'd used street drugs, and I'd never used street drugs. And back then, we didn't have pill heads in NA, we had heroin addicts,
right,
and crack addicts, and
cocaine,
so
and all that.
Cocaine. And I felt like they'd look at me, and they'd be like, what is the matter with you? Like, you're on 2 pills a day. So I just was like, I didn't know where I belonged. And she said, well, why don't you go to Al-Anon? And I knew that my grandfather on my mother's side had been a violent alcoholic. And even at that point, I couldn't really call my father an alcoholic, because I felt like it was unfair to call him that. But when I saw him die of his alcoholism, the oncologist stood in front of me and said, we can't treat your father's cancer with chemo because his severe cirrhosis prevents us, he'd never be able to process the drugs, the chemo drugs. And the words severe cirrhosis, they were like a neon sign flashing in my mind. Like, my God, who has severe cirrhosis?
Alcoholics.
Right? So, and I said to my brother, I remember saying to him, like, Dad has severe cirrhosis. He's like, why are you so hung up on the cirrhosis thing? I mean, I'm telling me years before, yeah, Dad might be a mild alcoholic. Well, like, what the fuck is a mild alcoholic? I'm sorry for swearing, but
go right ahead.
I mean, so I didn't know enough about addiction to argue with him. And anyway, it wouldn't, I couldn't control my dad's behavior anyway. So, but I could control mine. I realized when I was standing over my dad and he was dying, that my son was going to be in the same position I was if I didn't take care of myself. And it still took me 1.5 years to actually get my ass into that doctor's office and say, I want a detox. Like, I want to come off these drugs. And he put me on, and I didn't tell him that I told him I was a pain patient and that I wanted to, reduce my tolerance so I didn't have to take Schedule II drugs anymore, which is such, I mean, the kind of bullshit that we pull on ourselves and other people, it's just amazing. I mean, and I was motivated. Here I am, a white, middle-aged, professional-looking mother, right? I come in, and who's going to call me an addict? Who's going to call me a junkie? Nobody. So, because I don't look like I've ever scored. I have no tattoos. I have no medal. I have none of that stereotypical bullshit that we think it, signifies addiction. Addiction happens without all of that. It happens despite all of that, So anyway, I went into him and told him I wanted to detox, and he put me on Suboxone. The introduction, like the induction to Suboxone, was just awful because I had been on fentanyl. Fentanyl is like the only drug that can compete at the receptor sites with buprenorphine. Like, it can battle with buprenorphine to occupy your opioid receptors. And I went into this 2-day long precipitated withdrawal. It was just it was the worst kicking I've ever done in my life. I felt like I just wanted somebody to pull my arms off, that restless leg stuff that we get. And so, and the only place I could sleep was like in a hot bath. I mean, it was just terrible. And of course, like I couldn't take care of anything else but myself during that period. And on the third day, I woke up and I was suddenly well. Like I was like, oh my God, I can, like just looking, it was September. It was the first week in September, Labor Day. I was looking at the sunlight coming through the trees in my backyard, and I was just like, oh my God, I'm alive. Like I'm alive. And I could smell things again. And I felt super well. And I thought, okay, well, I'll just stay on this drug forever. That's Suboxone.
Which is basically what they want you to be, on it forever.
Well, this doctor didn't have enough spaces, thank goodness, on his DEA or I can't remember which agency regulates the number of spaces that doctors have to treat patients on a chronic basis with maintenance Suboxone. So he couldn't do that. He needed me to demonstrate that I was tapering. And so I saw him every week for 2 months. And it cost me a shitload of money, but not as much as rehab would have cost. And I was able to take care of my son. And in the third week of that 8-week detox, I realized like the Suboxone had turned on me, like music didn't sound psychedelic anymore. I mean, I was becoming more myself, and I had to plan my son's birthday. I had all this stress, like 15 little boys coming over, 11-year-olds. I had to, buy all the food, send out all the invitations, hear back from all the parents, arrange the house, clean it, blah, blah, blah. And I started to think to myself, oh my God, like I need something to help me with this. And I realized I was never going to have something outside me again to help me with this. Like I was going to have to develop something inside to help me with this. And I actually fell off my chair in that moment. And in that moment, I called a friend of mine who was an Al-Anon member. And I said, yeah, you know what? I need to talk to your husband who was in AA. Because like, what else could I do? I needed to reach out for help. And, like the most amazing thing was these people called me back. Like this guy called me back. And he's like, and I was like freaking out saying, oh my God, like I'm a fucking addict. And he's like, and look at what I've done with my life. And I wasn't working at the time. And, I had really messed up my life. And he was like, look, you're doing the right thing right now. Right now, you're in the right place. Right now, you're taking the right actions. Just keep it very local and in the moment. And he gave me the number of somebody else whose story, matched mine with the drugs. And he said, you might want to talk to her. And she called me back for free. And I'm starting to wonder, like, who are these people who call you back for free? Like for free. And she talked to me for an hour and a half and agreed to be my sponsor in her program. And I met her like 3 days later at a meeting, and like she was my sponsor. And the great irony of the situation is that she was headed into a relapse, but she taught me so many valuable skills. I mean, she taught me things like, no person is ever going to save you. No meetings are ever going to save you. Your relationship with your power of your choice, your understanding is going to save you. Yes. Now, I took that to mean that I didn't have to go to meetings, so I went to one meeting. For the first year, I went to maybe 1 or 2 meetings. I kept it like very Al-Anon style. Like Al-Anon people don't go to a meeting every day. And also my husband was like not into my going to more than one meeting a week. He was like, that's not okay with me. And so I thought, well, I can't, I have to please him. Like I can't do this. I can't go to a meeting every day because, it would create havoc at home. So I went to one meeting. I maybe called her once a week. I worked the steps. I was really good at like doing my homework because I've always been a great student. But like, I didn't recognize that she was headed into a relapse. Like she was using cough medicine that fall. And then she called me the following winter, like in February, and told me that she had used, and she went to rehab. And then I didn't know what to do. That's one of the difficulties of recovery is that, nobody talks about, not only nobody talks about sex, but nobody talks about, what to do in case your sponsor relapses. I mean, these things are like not brought up. So I actually was told that maybe I ought to stay with her so that she could work with alcoholics once she got out of the rehab and addicts.
God, it's like amazing. Like I'm hearing all this, and it's like,
yeah,
where does this come from?
And so like, and I was told to get a new sponsor immediately, which contradicted the other one. And then I was told to pray for guidance, and I took the third position because I thought, okay, I'll just pray. But that can be a really passive way of dealing with it, you know. And so like for a month, I couldn't even get in touch with my sponsor, which was not good. I mean, you know, I should have gotten a new sponsor right away. I wish I had, but it went down like it went down. And after she came out of rehab, she was still like inside her addiction. I mean, she was struggling with active addiction. And so I should have gotten a new sponsor. It took me several months to get somebody new. I got somebody new, and then that person had so many sponsees that she cut all her sponsees loose. So I got a third sponsor. And by that time, I just didn't really have like a stable community around me. I didn't have a stable recovery practice that I relied on. My body was still suffering because after 3.5 years on fentanyl, for goodness sake, like the highest dose and abusing it, I mean, I just was not, I was not physically well. So, and that fall I got sick, and I was given codeine cough syrup, and I took it as prescribed, but it set off like, it made me remember what it was like to have the outside solution. And I started criticizing myself, and I started comparing myself with other people, other mothers, especially who were epidemiologists or surgeons or rock stars, like literal rock stars. And, you know, people who were really successful and doing something with their lives. And I started to feel a huge amount of self-pity. And that's just lethal for me. Like I've learned to recognize, not to say that I don't ever engage in self-pity, because I do, but I've learned to recognize it. And so I got this other sponsor, but I relapsed. Like I actually went to see my aunt for New Year's in 2010 on the 2nd of January. And I saw a picture of my cousin who had been killed by her drug dealer the previous summer. And she had been beaten to death by him. And I saw that this picture of her, this woman who was maybe 8 years younger than I was, she, you know, had never been able to get clean and sober. She'd never been able to get recovery. And I looked at it and thought, this is where I belong. Like, I belong with these people who die. And I just will never make anything of my life. And so I might as well just use. And so I knew that my aunt had Oxy in the house, but I didn't use there. The next house I went to, I stole drugs from. And I stole 2 pills of Vicodin, like Vicodin 5, really mild Vicodin. I took one. And as soon as I took that pill, I heard all the women that I knew in recovery, even peripherally knew, sort of sighing in a terrible Greek chorus, like tragedy chorus. And I put the other one back really quickly. And then after I left that house, I called my sponsor and told her I'd used. And she said, give yourself a limited amount of time to beat yourself up and get on with the work. And ever since then, I've been getting on with the work. You know, like I've just been putting one foot in front of the other. She said, don't tell every meeting that you go to that you used. Just tell one. And I told the next one that I went to the next day. And there was somebody there who gave me a coin from Quebec that was in French, and it said, you know, like, call before you use, basically. And and ever since then, I've just been oriented toward how can I help others, and also while also taking care of myself, because like having grown up in an alcoholic family, my tendency is to blame myself for other people's problems, blame myself for my own problems, and really stretch beyond my limits to work for other people. And so I've learned, I have like a therapy group that's full of women, meets every other week. We're meeting on Wednesday this week, that's full of women in recovery. And we talk about these issues of like how to, especially as women, we take care of other people at the cost of ourselves. And we talk about how we can balance, like how we find those boundaries, and we get very vulnerable, and we talk about our feelings. Like we've formed, like I have that community. I have a very strong sponsor that I've been working with for 7 years. And, a meeting community. And so I just started, I started building that for myself. And I really believe that, that what heals me, what healed me and continues to heal me from addiction is community. And this right here, what we're doing right now, is super countercultural. Because, look, I mean, we live in a sheerly capitalist society. I mean, those people, the same kinds of people that sold us drugs, they want to sell us sugar. They want to sell us sleep aids. They want to sell us all kinds of bling. They want to sell us devices, screens that'll numb us out. They want to sell us anything that will numb us out. They don't actually want us to form community, because then if we form community, we don't need to buy shit, So what we're doing now is like offering this for free to people. And so I started my blog in 2011. And that was a way of like giving back the wisdom and using my skills as a writer and a reporter to report out some stuff that was going on in around addiction. And I was among the very first bloggers to take his addiction seriously as an issue. And my blog is called Guinevere Gets Sober. The whole reason that addiction is even said commonly in the culture is because I and a few other people were out there like saying we have to talk about these issues. We have to bring them into the culture. So pretty soon after that, I started writing stories for journalistic outlets like The Fix and other places. And an editor called me. Like I had published 2 books before I got sober and clean. And I thought I would never write again, And an editor saw a story that I had written about 3 triathletes who used exercise to stay sober and clean, and asked me if I would write a book about exercise and recovery. And I said, well, if we're going to write about exercise, we have to write about sleep and meditation and nutrition and pleasure, because all of those things are about the body. So I wrote this book called The Recovering Body, and it took a look at all those modalities, and it talked to scientists. It had, science backing each of these ways of recovering. And then after that, he said, what else do you want to write? And I said, well, I think we need to write about sexuality, because whenever I made a speech about the recovering body, people would always ask me about the sex part. They were always like, yeah, I work in a rehab and we don't let women have vibrators or relationships for their whole treatment stay. So how do we help them get in touch with their sexuality? Well, I had no answers for these people who were asking questions. So I decided to interview people. Not just scientists and people who could tell me about things like the human skin and how our sexuality functions in healthy adulthood. Like Emily Nagoski was a wonderful person who talked to me. But I interviewed 36 ordinary recovering people and found out, just got an a very, it's not even a scientific study, right? So it was really the briefest of looks at inside, what it's like for real recovering people to try to have pleasurable sexual relationships. And it's very, very complicated. When we give up drugs and alcohol, we give up a source of comfort and pleasure, right? And safety. And a lot of people grieve over that, but we also regain our sexual response. Like a lot of people who were on the drugs that I was on, I've talked to men who've had spontaneous orgasms with no stimulation whatsoever in detox, because, their bodies are waking up, and despite the fact that they're 31 or 32 years old, they feel like they're 15.
Right.
So this is it's not exactly something you want to happen when you have a spontaneous orgasm. It does sound awesome, but, deal with these real problems that we have in sexuality. Another guy that I talked to was having sex with 3 different women every single day, just because he felt so sexually alive. And we call this in our culture, we call this horny, right? We joke about it, but this is a real, our sexual response is a real force for health. If we learn how to relate to our sexual response in healthy ways, it can really guide us in our recovery. I'm serious. Writing this book has changed my life, because if we take any drug that changes our head, I'm talking over-the-counter cough syrups, I'm talking Benadryl, which dries you up everywhere. You try to have sex on Benadryl, you're going to need lots of lube. So it's just like you need to understand, we need to accept that our sex drive is really a part of us that we want to protect. And when we take any drugs, we need to understand that we're going to change that sexual response and maybe even get rid of it. And for some people, that's what they want to do because this culture is so sex averse. It wants to tell us not to have sexual pleasure because then it can sell us porn and other things that make us, I mean, that's how people become sex addicts, right? Like they're not taught in childhood how to treat their body in healthy ways. When they start to play with themselves at 1 or 2 years old, they're told it's bad and never to do it. And or it's a sin or something horrible will happen to them. So I just think it's so important. Like I wrote this book, it's organized like a meeting with speakers and topics. And it's designed to open up the discussion among recovering people about how we can have really healthy, wonderful, normal sex lives. So that's where I am today. I'm a writer, and I've applied for graduate school in social work because I also teach at the university where I live in Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh, and I teach freshmen, and I really love teaching students who are in the midst of transition. I mean, I think everything I've written about in all of my books is all about how to negotiate large transitions in life, and so I would like to see if I can become a therapist and actually legit help people that way and continue writing about people's major transitions. I think I'd also like to write about my cousin who died and her father who also died of his heroin addiction and the other people who didn't survive this disease in my family and how I've managed so far, God willing, to survive this disease.
And that's your story.
That's what I've got.
I got to tell you that there came a certain point where I was just like, it's just speechless. So much addiction in your family, in your life, so many challenges. This is a true rock bottom story, where you literally just reach a point of absolute desperation and so lost. And to hear you tell your story so eloquently and, with such conviction and authority and education, it just so much baffles the imagination of where we came from. We're addicts that have struggled, that have thought about killing ourselves, that were completely numb to society for so long. When we get out, and I'll even go back to the scenario about the guy who was having these orgasms, these what were they called?
Spontaneous orgasms.
You become alive again, and the energy level goes through the roof, and you're like, what do I do with myself now? And
exactly.
For so many of us, we channel it in different ways, right? For some of us, it's sexually. I've heard these stories about people that have been using opioids for years, so they're basically dead, and then they come out of it, and then this is exactly how they behave. It's like, dude, I feel like a kid again. It's like, oh my God, like everything's working again, right? Like I'm actually interested. I just want to say one thing. One thing I learned in writing the book about sexuality, sex and recovery, is that having hookups is not necessarily sex addiction. I mean, I've talked to people who have been told by their sponsors that if they want to have sex outside of a committed relationship, they must be a sex addict. And I don't think that's good. I mean, you hear some stuff in the rooms, right? I think people have to be very careful about diagnosing other people without actually having the background in diagnosis. I think that when we substitute sexuality for drugs, I explore that in the book, how to know when you're doing that. That can get dangerous. But this guy that I talked to is a healthy 30-something-year-old guy, and he's now in a committed relationship and has been for 3 years. So, I mean, that's not to say that he's not a sex addict, right? But I'm just saying, let's be careful before we say like these just going out and satisfying our real normal human desire for connection and pleasure is like another illness. Yes. And I'll also say this, that, when I came into the fellowship, my sponsor had told me, listen, I really don't care what you do. I mean, I'm going to have one requirement. The only requirement for you and I is that you don't drink or use. All right, that's it. Whatever else you do in these early stages, we can get through that. And the steps will help you work through these different things. But in the meantime, we're going to work on this first. And so there was aspects of acting out, especially in the first year with sex addiction or whatever you want to call it, or acting out sexually, eating. I mean, that is oh my God.
Sugar is just an enormous. Yeah.
Pints of ice cream. It was salt and sugar. Forget about it.
Sure.
And fat. Pizzas and fast food and sugar, and it's just this constant repeat. And then it's just a constant that you go through. Instant gratification. That's what I want, right? So that first year was riddled with that. But alongside of that, I had my assignments, and every week I would have to show up and have step work ready. And as I'm working through that step work, it becomes very difficult to deny that there's certain things that have become obsessive in my life, that have taken control of my life, where I'm not. This is not benefiting me, and eating fat and sugar and acting out sexually is not benefiting me, especially if I want to be in a long-term relationship or if I want longevity in my life. I remember 3 years into my recovery, I was diagnosed with stage 1 of cirrhosis, and I was 3 years clean and sober. And I told the doctor, I go, how is this possible? She's like, let's look at your diet.
Yeah. Well, there is non-alcoholic cirrhosis. And fatty liver disease is really prevalent in the society. Yeah.
Yes.
And how many meetings do you go to where there's a raft of donuts right inside the door, along with the coffee and sugar and cream and all that? And I've just learned to walk right past them. I mean, it's really hard. But I also need to say that, again, I think I started out by talking about balance in life, this recovery thing, doing it perfectly and living a totally clean life, can get obsessive for me in and of itself. And I can try to, I think to myself, well, I should really cut out all sugar. And then I think, well, I'll cut out all processed foods and refined flours. And then I think, well, I should really go paleo. And then I think, well, I should go vegan paleo or something. You know what I'm saying? Make it more and more impossible to just live a normal life. So I don't know, as a person who has been addicted to drugs and has addiction, is it possible for me to achieve moderation in other places? I think so. And seriously, I mean, there are people who are going to die of fatty liver disease instead of, an overdose of heroin, but listen, but they'll live longer,
They're going to live longer, but going to live miserable. They're going to die a miserable death because they're going to be obese and they're uncomfortable and they can't walk and they have all these different, illnesses.
I agree.
It's not a way.
Look, I still weigh the same as I did when I took my first drink, I mean, so I try to keep myself fit, but I try not to get obsessive about it, It's the obsession that activates this perfectionistic streak in me that, I've got to do it perfect. So I've actually tried to do some things imperfectly recently. That's part of my spiritual awakening, is that I am just really an imperfect person. And I have to sometimes try to be imperfect. I took the GREs and I tried for mediocre. And that was awesome for me because I used to try for straight A's all the time. And I would have killed myself. I would have caused myself an immeasurable physical pain just sitting up for, into the middle of the night studying for the GRE. And I just tried for mediocre. That's one example.
I got to tell you, we could be on here for 4 hours because you went into so many different tangents. I was like, oh, I want to touch on that. Oh, I want to touch on that. Especially about fear and consumption in society, about how we've been completely roboticized into believing exactly what we hear and what we see in society and externally. And it's disgusting,
And buying stuff to relieve our fear.
Fear and consumption. Shit. Yeah, that's what it is. I need this. Go buy this because you need to wear this. You need to put this on, you need to wear this, you need to eat this, you need to go there. It's horrible. And then as far as the drugs and the doctors, I've had interviewees that we've gone into depth about, this epidemic, and the doctors basically are almost blackmailed into prescribing opioids because Big Pharma is like, if you want to be included in the recommended doctor list, if you want to be listed here, then you need to promote our drug. So if somebody's in pain, you need to get them through it. So they're not concerned with wellness. There's no money in the cure. There's only money in the medicine. So as far as I'm concerned, Western medicine, can go to hell. My wife's a yoga instructor and she's a wellness instructor, and she's certified wellness coach. And so there's so much of, you walk away from traditional medicine, and it's more about your exercising, your diet, and your water intake, and superfoods, and all these different things that have nothing to do with what the pharmacists want from you.
Another real solution is community and talking. And one reason I want to become a therapist is just to help, especially for young people, I think, is to help them express what they're feeling and what they're thinking while they're feeling and thinking it. And if there's one thing that's kept my son from getting mired in drugs and alcohol, I think it's the fact that ever since he could talk, I've been asking him, how do you feel? How does this make you feel? Tell me what you feel right now. And he's a 20-year-old guy who's able to say what he feels while he feels it. And that is an antidote to addiction.
Yes, absolutely. And
because it causes connection. It causes connection between us. And that's not, capitalist society doesn't want us to connect. It wants us to look at our screens so we can buy more shit.
Right. But again, there's so many different tangents. But I want to talk a little bit more about your book, because I want to give some really, I want our listeners absolutely to get your book. So first, tell us how our listeners can get in touch with you, how they can reach you.
They can get in touch with me just by going to my website, jennifermatesa.com, or my blog, guineveregetsober.com. And there are contact forms on both of those sites. And
the name of your books?
You wanted to know, the names of my books? Well, the most recent one is called Sex and Recovery, a meeting between the covers, which is a nice pun. You told me I could use puns, but it's meeting between the covers of the book and the covers of the bed. The other one about addiction is called The Recovering Body, Physical and Spiritual Solutions for Remaining Clean and Sober. And that's also on Amazon, and you could probably get it at your local bookstore too, if you have one. It's in my recovery bookstore, because we have a wonderful recovery bookstore here in Pittsburgh. And then before I got clean and sober, I had written 2 other books, and one is about a breast cancer patient, and the other one is actually about my pregnancy, which I sold to Random House back in the year 2000, I guess. So those are all on Amazon as well. And if you're really interested in sex, in talking about sex in recovery, we have a secret women's Facebook group. So if I really like to encourage them to follow me on Facebook, my author page, and then send me a message if you want to belong to the secret group about sex in recovery, because we talk about really interesting questions and problems and experiences with sexuality. It's women only, and I'm investigating the possibility of starting a men's group, because I've had some men approach me asking me whether that's possible. Beautiful. And I also have a series of short videos on my YouTube channel. So if they Google me on YouTube, they can find me. And I have a couple up, and I'm getting ready to post a third shortly. So I just started this like a month ago, talking with real people about sexuality.
I'm going to list all these on the show notes, the YouTube, the webpage, the books. So folks, make sure to go to Jennifer's show notes, and there you will be able to find her. I will have all these things listed for you guys. Quick reference. So what I do want to ask you though, just a couple of tips for our newcomers. This is a huge topic. I have watched, I've been in recovery now for close to 14 years. And I have watched so many people get caught up in either the relationship or the sexuality or whatever in their first year, and they just don't know what they're up against, right? Especially in that first year of recovery, where it's a selfish program and they really have to, focus on their recovery. What kind of tips or what kind of suggestions can you make to some of our newcomers?
So I talk about this in the book. There's a whole chapter on the infamous 1-year rule, right? Because we get into recovery, and people who are not in a relationship, single people, are told, don't have sex for a year. Some of them are told, and other people are told, don't have a relationship in your first year of being clean and sober. Married people are not told anything, really. So you're on your own if you're married. Good luck with that. So the tips, the main tip that I would offer is, okay, so I'll just frame this by saying it's a really, really good idea to think about not having sex or not changing your relationship, the nature of your relationship for a good long while in recovery. I think 1 year is really pretty arbitrary, especially for young people who are getting sober at 18, 19, 20, 21 years old. Like, to not have sex for an entire year looks like a really big barrier to recovery. So what I say is, these are all suggestions that you hear in recovery, and you have to be able to talk with people. Like, the most important thing is that you talk with people about it. Like, I'm really feeling like I want to have sex. Like, what do I do about this, And build a community around yourself so that you can actually get some experience, other people's experience. And people are probably going to tell you, yeah, try to resist that for a while. And then you might find some other young people or new people, newcomers in recovery who might tell you, yeah, I broke down and after 6 months I had sex. I've talked with people newcomers who tried to remain celibate for a whole year, and some of them lasted 3 months, some of them lasted 6 or 9 months. So I think what I was going to say at the beginning was, it's really like the entire purpose of recovery is to get to know who you are, like who we are as people. And when I got clean and sober, the real Jen Matesa started to come out. And I really had to, it was a lot of hard work. It took time, but the whole purpose is to understand who you are, what you need, and what you want for your life. A big part of sexuality is desire. And I talk a lot about the idea of desire in this book. And so, like, normal, healthy desire is okay. And there might be other ways to satisfy that normal, healthy desire on your own for a while so that you can make your recovery the focus of your attention. It's really often said, you can't put anything before your recovery or you'll lose it. And that's true. But I think sometimes people get super afraid of doing anything. And especially in this culture where sex is seen as a bad thing, they're like, well, I can't have sex because that would be bad. I can't have pleasure because pleasure is not good because it's addictive. So you just need to inquire into that and use your community to help you.
Okay, all right. And so let's say, for example, now I'll use me as an example. So there was 3 years, it took me about 3 years because I worked the steps in the NA step working guide. It took me a fucking forever to finish that. It's like a college degree. I think it actually took me 4 years.
NA's literature has some really good stuff about sexuality, by the way.
It absolutely does. And the beautiful thing about it is that it just discusses addiction. So you can apply that to anything. You're addicted to anything, and you can just work the steps around it. So for someone who has finished the steps and has gone through this fearless moral inventory, and there is a section in there about sex, but then there comes that time when you're done, right? And you're done with the 12 steps and you're really ready to get into a relationship, but there's still addictive behavior. What kind of suggestions do you have for people who are now more advanced in the steps, who are more mature, as far as getting into a healthy relationship sexually?
Well, let me ask you a question back, which would be, when you were done with the steps and you still had a few addictive behaviors going on or obsessive behaviors, did you feel like you really knew who you were? Did you really understand the nature of your desires?
Man, that's...
'Cause that would be a query I would ask. And By the way, this book has queries at the end of each chapter. I have practiced Quaker practice for a long time, and Quakers don't have any creed or code. They have queries. They ask themselves questions that they can return to again and again. So I think that one really big problem with the self-help movement right now is that it purports to have solutions that work for everybody. And I think really these are questions that each person needs to solve in the privacy and sacredness of her own heart and soul.
Yeah, but then that's also very introspective, and you're kind of almost like figuring it out on your own. Like, for example, it took me...
I think it would be really important to share it at least with your sponsor.
Yeah.
I mean, one reason I wrote this book is to be able to use it in groups. You can form a study group or a book group and read this book together and talk about these issues. Like, yeah, this happened to me, or no, I couldn't have sex for 2 years or whatever. But I think it's very important to use this in community.
Okay, I see what you're saying. There is actionable sections in your book that allows you to kind of ask yourself better questions.
Yeah. Explore the nature of, the problems of desire and pleasure and, abstinence, celibacy, things like that. Virginity, for goodness sake, what an outdated concept. But it's really important for people, that's a big milestone for some people. It continues to govern their thoughts. Like, oh yeah, I lost my virginity when I was 12. I shouldn't have, or it took me until I was 25 to lose my virginity and I must not be attractive. Like, these things govern our thoughts. So it's designed to help us inquire into them and get a better sense of who we are.
Absolutely. It is a topic that is very sensitive, very delicate. And, I think everyone's got a different viewpoint on it. And probably because there isn't such an, look at me, I'm already stammering. Because, when I can talk.
There's hardly any language.
Exactly.
I say that in the book. There's no language. We have no language for sexuality. Don't be embarrassed. It's the culture.
Yeah, it is tough because I can sit up here and I can talk about all the cocaine I did and the stupid stuff I did when I was doing coke and all the craziness. But talking about some of the sexual behavior, forget about it. It's like it's stuff that it's like I'm not talking to anybody about this. So I remember early on, even in I think it was about year three, I started an SLAA meeting, just because I was just like I couldn't talk about it in the regular meetings. And so I just felt it was important to have a place where, anybody, and I knew there was a bunch of us out there that were just going bonkers, in that area, sexually. And so the meeting actually filled up pretty good, right? And we actually had a pretty steady group for probably about a year. Then people started getting married, and they just, I can't come here anymore. And it's just one of them. Listen, it's difficult. There is, that, like you say, the language is, I think, is more complex. So, folks, if you get a chance, make sure to read this book, especially if you're sexually challenged.
Well, and the ladies out there, join my secret Facebook group on sober sexuality for women. We talk about all kinds of stuff.
I think it's
you have to join to know what it is. So
yeah, I think it's very important that there is a forum for this, right? I think that it's very necessary. It took me 10 years in recovery to meet my wife.
Wow.
And I had lived with two women in the course of recovery. The first one was a year of absolute hell. Neither one of us knew how to properly communicate. It was a great learning experience because I knew what not to do, and I learned a lot about myself. And then the second relationship, basically, I recognized that this wasn't the person for me, but it was a really nice relationship. It ended really well, and I knew exactly what I was looking for in a relationship. And a few months later, after we broke up, I met my wife. So
exactly, that's how it often happens, right? We refine our ideas of our desire. That's what I was saying. Did you have an idea of what you desired? Now, sometimes it's a trial and error process, right? We're gonna fuck up.
Yes.
And the beauty of recovery is that it gives us the 10th step so that we can make amends if we've done any harm, right?
Yes. And I've told my sponsees too. I go, look, you're not going to meet you might. But chances are you're not going to meet the one, out the gate. You just finish your steps. You've got a good foundation. Now you're going to start dating. You want to get serious. The first one you meet is probably not going to be it. So get out there and really be open-minded. Don't get yourself into a situation where you start to become sort of definite about this is the one. This is the one.
Right.
But go all in. Go all in, communicate, talk, spend time. If you move in with them, you know what I mean? Chances are that's not going to be the one, and you're going to learn a whole hell of a lot. I don't know if I'm giving the right advice, but that's what I did. I moved in. I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about what I wanted, what I didn't want, and what kind of an asshole I can be.
All I hear you saying is that, recovery is about living, right? I mean, it is about living. It's not about saving life. Life is there to be lived. And you're saying gobble it all up, go all in, try it, I mean, other disturbing stories that I heard when I was researching sex and recovery were from people who hadn't had sex in 12 years and hadn't the least idea how to connect with anyone.
Oh, wow.
And had become basically sexually anorexic, men and women, and didn't know how to connect, and they weren't living, so using other people is not living.
No.
And becoming definite is not living, and becoming sexually anorexic is not living. What's living is being honest about, like you said, learning how to communicate and being honest about what you want, and trying to, if you don't know what that is, trying your best to figure that out. I hate to sound so earnest here, but that's the way it is.
No, I agree. I agree 100%. And I've made this suggestion to people as well, because there's other people that they keep, like, they do the 3-month thing, right? They'll be in a relationship for 3 months. She's the one. She's amazing. Oh my God, I finally met her. And I'm like, God, you need to slow down. This is the 4th time I've heard you, and I go, why don't you make a commitment to stay with her for 6 months? Right? Oh, 6 months. She's the one. Right? And 2 weeks later, it's like, oh, wow, okay, so how do I get out of this one? Buddy, it's not her, it's you, and you need to do some real strong introspection about what's going on with you, that you keep jumping into these relationships where
and
you're
deciding they're the one before
that they're the
you know.
one, and this whole, you start professing the love thing, it's like, wow, slow down, spend some time getting to know this person. This is for the rest of your life. And I'll tell you, I did that. When I first started dating, I did that a lot. I'm like, oh my God, I think this is it. I think this is the one, right? And then, a few weeks later, I can't stand her,
that's just the dopamine firing.
There you go. It's exactly what it is. But the cool thing was that when I met my wife, 3 months after I met her, I asked her to marry me. So 5 months from when I broke up with my girlfriend that I'd been living with for 10 months, I'd asked my wife to marry me. But it was
Did she say yes?
Yes. Yeah, she did say.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
I know. But I'll tell you what. I knew she was going to say yes. I knew she was. We were 100% on the same page. I knew God had delivered, but I also knew that I'd done a lot of work to get there. I was not the person I was even remotely. I mean, we're talking complete transformation over the last 10 years. Now we've been together for like 4 years. We just celebrated 3 years of marriage.
Congratulations.
And we're better than ever. We're actually better than ever. And so, yes. But like I said, when somebody asks me, wow, that's what I want, I go, buddy, it took me 10 years to find my wife. So I'll just start with that.
Right. But you didn't remain celibate for those 10 years, right? I mean, you
how do you live with somebody? How do you live with somebody?
You dove in. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, no, there was no celibacy. That was actually kind of a problem. There was, I actually did do 10 months of celibacy just to get off the merry-go-round, because I was using big time. And so I did do that, and I discovered a whole realm of myself. That was one of the best things I did for myself too. I really discovered a lot about myself. So I think,
oh my gosh, people can discover huge parts of themselves when they become celibate for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, because your mind, you remove that aspect of that sexuality out. And you also remove that aspect of, am I going to get married? Am I going to get into a relationship? Am I going to meet the one? Am I at the grocery store? I'm like, she might be the one. When that gets removed from the equation, and I stop, everywhere I am, I'm obsessed with one or the other, and it all has to do with a female, and now that's gone, and my attention is focused all around me. I'm able to see things again, almost like when I got sober for the first time, and I'm like, wow, look at the mountains. Oh my
Yeah,
God, I can't
exactly.
believe it. I live in Costa Rica.
I'm alive. Yeah.
It's exactly. All right. Well, listen, like I said, there were so many aspects of your story that we could deviate into because it's just so fascinating. And I've just enjoyed this interview so much, Jennifer.
I'm so glad. It's delightful talking with you.
Yeah, you do tell a great story. I love it. But let's start to close down here. And the way that I like to close down is for the newcomer. So I'm going to ask you 5 questions about your early recovery, and I want you to respond with inspiring and insightful answers you can share with our newcomers. Are you ready?
Sure.
Excellent.
Fire away.
All right. So number 1, what was keeping you from getting clean or staying clean when you first got introduced to recovery?
I think when I first got introduced to recovery from addiction, it was after I started going to Al-Anon and I realized that I should maybe try AA or NA. What kept me from getting recovery was I looked at the differences rather than the similarities.
Yep.
I know it's kind of a cliche, but I needed to look at how the fact that, using 2 pills a day or overusing my Stadol or whatever was very, very similar to what, maybe what a heroin addict did, even if I didn't sell off all my possessions or trick in order to do it.
Right. Absolutely. And number 2, at what point did you have a spiritual awakening, that aha moment in recovery when you accepted that you were powerless over drugs and alcohol, but for the first time had developed the hope that you could recover?
Well, it was when I fell off the chair, when I talked about how I was 3 weeks into detox and I was planning my son's birthday party and I had this stress and I thought I needed to take something for this stress, and I realized I would never have anything outside myself again to deal with the stress if I was going to really get better. And I fell off my chair and I realized I had to reach out to somebody who was in recovery. And that's when I called my friend's husband. But yeah, that was pretty, I felt after that, when those people called back and I started going to meetings and meeting people, I felt caught in a golden net. That's the way it felt to me. And it sometimes still feels like I had jumped off, like I was at the jumping off point, like it says in one of the books. And I jumped off and I was caught by this golden net of people who called me back for free.
It is amazing. It is amazing where, especially in early recovery, when you start picking up the phone and people actually answer, it is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
But it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing.
It's totally beautiful.
All right. So number 3, do you have a favorite book you would recommend to a newcomer that you read in early recovery?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I just think it's important to read whatever recovery process or system you choose. It's important to read the literature of that system. Gosh, I'm thinking about the other books and looking at my bookshelf. I think probably David Sheff's Beautiful Boy was a non-program book that really meant a lot to me and helped me see that I could get recovery. Are you familiar with that book, Beautiful Boy?
No, I'm not. And is it about addiction? Is it about recovery? Is it about?
Oh, and also Drinking a Love Story was great, but
that gets recommended a lot.
Yeah, but Beautiful Boy is a book about David Sheff is a journalist, and he wrote a New York Times magazine piece about his son's meth addiction, and then that turned into a book about everything that he and his family tried to do to get his son to get recovery. And finally he did quit the meth. But it was really wonderful to see that, like, despite all the bad things, like all the wreckage that the meth addiction and addiction in general had caused this kid and his family still loved him. I was really afraid that maybe I had caused irreparable damage, but people still loved me, So one of the main things that I learned in early recovery, was that I was still lovable. I wasn't such an enormous fuck up that no one would ever love me again.
Well, that goes for so many of us, me included. You just feel like you've crossed so many lines, burned so many bridges, caused so much wreckage that you're done. And it's so not true.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love it. All right. So number 4, what was the best suggestion you have ever received?
Oh, my goodness. How can I only pick one? Well, I've received this suggestion from in various ways from different people in recovery, and that is to quit beating the shit out of myself, and just get on with the work. That's what my sponsor, one of my sponsors, said when I relapsed. She said, give yourself a limited amount of time to beat yourself up and then get on with the work. My current sponsor understands she understands perfectly well how I beat the shit out of myself, and she has sometimes kept me from taking inventory because she knows that I use it to beat the shit out of myself. Like, okay, I'm going to find the place where I should have changed and this would never have happened, So yeah, easy does it.
Turn the ass-kicking machine off.
Right, correct.
Yeah, I've been told that. All right, number 5, if you could give a newcomer only one suggestion, what would it be?
Oh my goodness. Please keep coming back. That's what I would say. You must keep an open mind and keep coming back, because you will get it. So many people that I've seen who have had trouble quitting using or drinking think I should just not come anymore. And I've said, please keep coming back.
Beautiful. I love it. Great suggestions, Jennifer. Thank you again so much for joining us.
Oh, it's been awesome, Omar. Thank you so much for having me.
This has been awesome. It's great. I'm so glad we were finally able to hook up here.
Yeah, I know. Me too. It's been great.
All right, folks. We have now reached the end of our show. Thanks for joining us. And as we say here in Costa Rica, pura vida.
Pura vida, that's clean life.
Thank you for joining us on the SHAIR Recovery Podcast. To check out the show notes page on this interview, or to thank our guests for sharing their story, go to www.theshairpodcast.com. While you're on the website, don't forget to sign up for our free newsletter to stay up to date on the latest news, podcasts, and interviews. Want to be one of our guests and share your story? Then go to our website and click on the Share Your Story button. We share our inspiring recovery stories every Tuesday, so subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher Radio to get your free weekly download. We'll see you then. The opinions shared on this show reflect those of the individual speaker and not of any 12-Step Fellowship